I am the Philosophical Bachelor, and today I want to talk about the evolution of the problem of free will according to Henri Bergson. Bergson taught at the Collège de France for 15 years from 1900 to 1914. In 1904 to 1905, Bergson delivered 20 lectures there, tracing the history of thought on free will, starting with the ancient Greeks through to modern philosophy. That course is entitled The Evolution of the Problem of Freedom. The college is an old and rather special institution. It is France's most prestigious academy, yet all its courses are open to the public for free, not even requiring them to register, and it confers no degrees. Today, its lectures are preserved for posterity, but in Bergson's time there, audio and video recording were still nascent technologies, which meant that most of the college's lectures then, including Bergson's, were lost. Yet we have this and three other of Bergson's lecture series, transcribed ad verbatim, thanks to a unique set of circumstances. Charles Piggy was a devoted student who tried to attend all of Bergson's courses in person, except for 4 years when he could not make it. He hired legal stenographers to take down what Bergson said, word for word. For those who are not familiar with the importance of Bergson's work, these lectures are a good entry point, explaining with great clarity the various angles on free will, an issue we are familiar with and remains one of the great problems of philosophy. Bergson distills how thinking on free will has evolved over our intellectual history chronologically, which is a wonderful effort for one such as myself interested in the problem of free will. For those familiar with Bergson, there is one additional reason to be interested in these lectures. While his PhD thesis, Time and Free Will, published in 1889, was already on free will, Creative Evolution, considered his most important work, was only published in 1907, after this lecture series. His lectures on freedom hence gave him the opportunity to consider how thought on free will changed over the history of philosophy, helping him sharpen his ideas, which he subsequently presented in his later works such as Creative Evolution, Mind Energy, The Creative Mind, and the Two Sources of Morality and Religion. We can now better understand the supporting sources of his ideas, since in those books, Bergson is virtually silent about his philosophical antecedents. According to Alexandre Lefebvre and Niels F. Schott, to understand if there is free will, we have to first understand reality, what nature is, so as to know if there is consciousness in nature or its contents, which is where free will can reside, making the problem of free will ultimately a metaphysical problem. For Plato, the reality we sense, our everyday conception of reality, is not true reality. This everyday conception is the sensible realm. Sensible because we sense it with our senses. He postulates an intelligible realm where forms, the idealized versions of things, reside. It is intelligible because we know of it through our intellect and memory. The objects in the sensible realm instantiate the forms, but as copies are less perfect than their perfect forms. Aristotle explains that the objects of the sensible realm are fallen because the forms combine with hyla, Greek for matter, which corrupts the perfection of the forms. Plotinus will explain much later that matter, being devoid of qualities, is evil relative to the rational order of things. From the perfection of the good, the intelligible realm, and then the sensible realm, there is a gradual descent in perfection until matter, which is at the bottom, being devoid of any perfection whatsoever, since it is devoid of qualities. Form being embodied in matter exposes these things to accidents, to contingency. It is this exposure that gives room for freedom. However, this ancient conception of freedom is an unfavorable one, reflecting the state of fallenness. It is not something powerful and desirable the way later thinkers will consider freedom to be. Relative to immutability, contingency is a defect in the eyes of the ancient Greeks. In their worldview, what is susceptible to change must be imperfect, since the perfect is already perfect. Any change can only make the perfect less perfect. However, we live in a world where there is movement and change. Hence, there is contingency and in that way, freedom. According to Bergson, Aristotle does not have a systematic theory on freedom, not being a system builder but an analyzer of concepts and theories. While the bulk of the lectures deal with metaphysics, Bergson also deals with the logical analysis relating to propositions about the future, such as "it will rain tomorrow," posed by the Megarian philosophers. Either it rains tomorrow or it does not rain tomorrow, making the proposition true or false necessarily. Since the proposition about the future is necessarily true or false, it must mean that the future is determined and hence there is no contingency. Aristotle's refutation is that what can be said truly at the present moment is that it rains tomorrow or it does not rain tomorrow. The disjunctive statement is what is true. The difficulty arises from how truth seems to be something timeless and eternal, the way mathematical propositions like 2 plus 2 equals 4 seems timeless and eternally true. Yet time needs to be taken into account. Truth is what conforms to reality, and since tomorrow has not arrived, there is no reality to conform to in the statement, since there is yet no existence of tomorrow prior to its arrival. Bergson suggests that the source of the error is the mind's inclination towards how all truths must be like mathematical truths, which, as is shown, is not the case. Bergson posits that free will only became a problem due to the rise of determinism. While the conception of the ancient Greeks of freedom is unfavorable, the existence of free will was not in question until the Stoics made substantial arguments for determinism. That is when the existence of free will came into question and became a problem. For the Stoics, movement and change are not imperfections. Bergson attributes the first formulation for what is now known as the principle of sufficient reason to the Stoics. Citing ancient sources, nothing is without a cause. In the presence of identical causes, there is every necessity that the same thing should happen. The same cause gives rise to the same effect necessarily. To the Stoics, this principle implies a universal necessity, a universal sympathy in all things, including the psychological, that nothing happens in one point of the universe that doesn't have an impact somewhere else, which is a precursor of the contemporary law of the conservation of energy. The world is an immense animal with perfect interconnection between all its parts, one unified single closed system. There is hence no room for free will, since every effect must have a cause somewhere else in the universe. The Stoics also refuted Aristotle's refutation of the Megarian argument, though that account is lost. I've spoken of Plotinus prior to the Stoics, even though he comes centuries after. This is because Plotinus is a Platonist, his aim being to clarify and extend the teachings of Plato and also Aristotle, which makes it easier to follow if elaborated alongside his masters. After the determinist attack of the Stoics, Plotinus's teachings return to a thesis of freedom. We can see hence that there are swings between free will and no free will throughout history, as the theories of both sides advance, though Bergson thinks that all the advancement comes from the determinist side, with the libertarian side only being able to play defense. Bergson gives only a brief nod to medieval thinkers such as Duns Scotus and Thomas Aquinas, and only because they influenced René Descartes. In the 16th century, Descartes made two significant contributions to the debate over free will. He proposes that all living things are in fact machines which operate mechanically. He thinks that animals are devoid of consciousness, making them automatons which actions are the results of mechanical inputs. He does, however, believe that human beings have consciousness, giving rise to a mind-body dualism and its associated conundrums of how something immaterial, such as the mind, can communicate with something material, such as the body, proposing that the mind does this communication through the pineal gland. For human beings, mechanism stops at the point of consciousness. Descartes hence straddles between libertarian free will for conscious beings, which for him only human beings possess, and mechanical determinism for everything else, both living and non-living. Descartes also made major contributions towards the development of mathematics, formulating algebraic relations between variables in what has become known as Cartesian space. This revolutionized how we understand what knowledge even is. Thinkers prior to the modern era thought that to know a thing is to know its essence, but one of the legacies of Descartes and the scientific worldview he helped launch is to consider knowledge and knowing to be knowing the relations between things through their expression as mathematical functions. Mathematics is of course also known and was in fact lauded by the ancients, Plato's Academy notoriously having a sign barring those ignorant of geometry from entering. However, Descartes' contribution to mathematics allowed quantification such that mathematical laws then became the basis of the sciences, because they could calculate the magnitudes of causes and effects. The dream then, which remained to this day, is that everything would then be calculable, hence making everything known. This explains why, despite Descartes adopting a dualism towards free will, posing determinism for all unconscious beings and libertarianism for conscious beings, determinism came to be the dominant view since it seems so capable of explaining phenomena, while libertarianism seems only to pose a poorly explained lacuna, where its supporters seem capable only of asserting it without presenting much evidence, at least not scientific evidence, the way the determinists seem to be able to. Bergson hence suggests that the evolution of the problem of free will is really the evolution of determinism, where the innovations come from new determinist arguments, while the libertarians such as Jean-Jacques Rousseau can only point to their intuition, their feeling of how they feel their will when acting. In addition, Benedictus de Spinoza and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, both determinists, dispense with the hyla of the Greeks in their metaphysics of pantheism and monadology, leaving no room for free will. They argue for compatibilism since in their theories, while there is nothing obstructing our logically possible choices, the choices we ultimately make are determined by prior events. The impetus undergirding libertarianism hence does not come from physics or metaphysics, but from theology. The Judeo-Christian and many other religions require human free will to enable divine judgment to be passed on them. While our knowledge indicates to us determinism, our intuition, which is not something that can definitively be demonstrated using analysis, tells us that we have free will. Bergson rounds off his lecture series ostensibly with Kant, though it is with utter Schopenhauer. Kant's critical metaphysics in his critique of pure reason is ultimately epistemological. According to Kant, all we can know through our senses and reason is phenomena, which are only representations of things and never the thing in itself, or noumena. Our contact with the world is mediated through our sense and cognitive apparatus, which filters them into categories in order to aid our understanding. We never experience only the raw sense data, and which in any case would not make any sense without being processed by our cognitive apparatus. For Kant, even mathematics, which he demonstrates to be synthetic a priori, is really just the sense and organization we give to the world. The world appears to fit well with mathematics, not because the world is mathematical, but because the way we understand the world is mathematical. We have no way to know reality because all we know are phenomena which are ordered and interpreted by our cognitive apparatus. We cannot know if it resembles the noumena and hence have to remain agnostic on what true reality is. Bergson explains that Kant's critical transcendental unified apperception leaves room for freedom, but this freedom is not the freedom of individual free will, but the freedom within human consciousness in general to constitute our understanding of the world. Kant thus insists on individual free will elsewhere, but only as a concession, a regulatory principle to safeguard morality in line with his religious beliefs. Now I'll explain why I think Bergson should have ended off with Schopenhauer, which he in fact did without attribution. According to Bergson, Kant was unable to bridge the lacuna of individual free will because he wanted to preserve the systematic unity of nature, the same way why the determinists find it hard to admit free will. Free will seems to be a gap in the laws of nature, which everywhere is cause and effect. Free will at bottom is an agent being the ultimate cause of its acts, with nothing further causing them, making this seem miraculous at least from the mechanical point of view. Schopenhauer sees himself as a follower of Kant, but figured out a way to reconcile phenomena with noumena. When we encounter external objects, our understanding of it is indeed mediated through our sensory and cognitive apparatus. But there is one thing which we sense and cognize immediately. That is our own self. What we will and how we act are in sync. When we will to lift our arm, we can see our arm being raised. Hence, our self-understanding of ourself and the external representation of ourself are the same, meaning the phenomena and the noumena in the case of ourself match. Since that is the case, by analogy, representations of external objects should also match up with their noumena. However, Schopenhauer is not a believer in libertarian free will. He is a determinist because of the principle of sufficient reason, that for every effect there is a cause and reason from the chain of causes and effects, such that all our acts are effects that come from prior causes. The principle of sufficient reason was inherited from Spinoza, Leibniz, and the Stoics. Leibniz explains that even if we do not know the cause, it certainly exists, there always being micro-perceptions which may be below the level of our conscious attention but are nonetheless present. Bergson does not in principle disagree with the principle of sufficient reason. However, he questions if any cause is ever the exact same. My example is how if you hit a person with a bat, you can expect the second time round to have a different effect. The cause has changed because the memory of the experience of being hit the first time has changed the victim. Bergson elsewhere terms this concept of cumulative experience duration. Putting the determinism of Schopenhauer aside, which in any case is not in Bergson's account, since we recognize the alignment of our own will and acts, our intuition concerning our agency is something we know, not from theoretical or scientific knowledge, but from inner experience. Besides, in the regular conduct of our lives, in our social systems such as our political and justice systems, and certain academic fields such as the social sciences, psychology, and even biology, human free will is presupposed. Hence, practically and intuitively, we act and feel that we possess free will, and hence the burden of proof lies on those who deny it and not the converse. This is likewise argued by libertarians such as Thomas Reid, which Bergson does not refer to, who argue for agent causation simply as a matter of common sense. It is the ones who defy common sense that owe the burden of proof. For the Platonists, the imperfection of the sensible realm, which is this world, is what makes freedom even possible. Free will means having a choice, with alternatives that really could be chosen. Perfect beings such as God have to always choose the best path, which means that he does not really have a possibility to adopt an alternative and hence does not really have free will. It seems imperfection is the price of freedom. Descartes recognizes the duality of deterministic mechanism and conscious free will, which corresponds to his mind-body duality. For us to be able to choose properly, we need everything else to be somewhat predictable. When we as causal agents order a tea, we expect a tea to be served and not a coffee. If the world is chaotic and we do not know what to expect, then there is no meaning in having a choice since we cannot know the outcome of our choice. Free agents depend on the world, at least its non-living content, to behave predictably. We need the mechanical laws of the sciences to operate, if not precisely, at least reliably, and to know what we can depend on and what is less certain. For instance, we expect elevators, cars, buildings, and planes to function in their prescribed ways, which is why we confidently enter into them. A dog, however, may not fetch a thrown ball, and a person may not comply with my commands. Knowing this unpredictability, we can plan accordingly, for instance, to be prepared to fetch the ball or carry out our commands ourselves. As Bergson observes, the free will debate seems ultimately to be a matter of knowledge versus intuition. Our scientific knowledge with its laws and principles for the most part seem to explain a determined world. The determinist view is convincing to many great thinkers like the Stoics, Spinoza, Leibniz, Schopenhauer, and arguably Kant. Yet it fails to explain what we seem to naturally intuit, that we have free will. If theory and reality collides, it is not reality that is wrong, but the theory. Moreover, not all knowledge is scientific or can be derived or explained analytically and logically. We may have inadequate proof of knowledge in many areas, and yet we can know with great confidence those things. Some examples being one person's feeling for another, that we are not in a simulation, that the choices we make come with consequences we have to bear, that we have free will. Knowledge comes in many forms, some like the synthetic a priori deductive mathematical proofs that Kant talks about, some in the form of logical but non-mathematical reasoning, some from experience, such as a smile on a friend's face indicating approval and not malice, some from how we feel and intuit. A person standing on a high bridge may feel fear even if he has the theoretical knowledge that the bridge is strong enough to support his weight easily. Rationally, he understands that he is safe, but emotionally he feels unsafe and knows he feels that way. The point being, not all knowledge is theoretical, and some cannot even be expressed or explained propositionally, but simply experienced. For instance, mystical experiences which cannot be described, but yet has been experienced by the mystic. If we do not believe that the mystic is lying, the inability for them to express in propositions their experience makes the experience no less true. The question of free will is ultimately a question of the origin of consciousness, of spirit, will, soul, or mind, words all trying to signify the immaterial entity that seems to be within us. These various words are merely different placeholders indicating the same thing, the principle of consciousness within conscious beings. There are two great challenges: to explain how life can arise from non-living matter, and how consciousness can arise in what is already alive. On the latter, Bergson believes that life and consciousness arose together, and that consciousness is a characteristic of all living things, not just human beings. To live is to be conscious. If existence was merely mechanical and determined, nothing new can come into the world, in the sense that all is already inherent in the initial conditions of the universe, and all that will unfold from there can be known through calculation. With consciousness and its consequence of free will, novel things can arise, since not all is contained in prior conditions, leading to a world that has the capability of true creativity. This will be the thesis for his subsequent book, Creative Evolution, for which he is best known and loved. On the former challenge of the origin of life, perhaps life did not arise out of non-living things, but came into existence alongside them, meaning that living things are as fundamental as non-living things and not a derivation from them. I do not know if Bergson thinks this, though he might have. Nonetheless, the speculation is that non-living things, life and consciousness are all equally fundamental. What Bergson has presented in his lecture series is by necessity a scanty sketch of the thinkers and their ideas on freedom. What I can do in such a brief essay as this will hence be merely a whisker of his already scanty sketch. What a reader can take away from this is that many of the ideas taught then and outlined here are still relevant to the contemporary free will debate, even as new fronts open due to new knowledge, such as Erwin Schrödinger's uncertainty at the quantum level, lending support to libertarianism. Thank you for listening to the Philosophical Bachelor.